They still talk about that autumn outside Red Hollow, when the winds carried more than dust and the sky seemed to watch with old, solemn eyes. It was a season of drought and dying cattle, a year after the war back east had settled, but long before peace ever reached the frontier. The land was quiet then, the kind of quiet that made men uneasy. Elias Boone rode the ridge like he did most mornings, one hand steadying his old mare's reins, the other resting easy on his saddle horn. He wasn't in any hurry. Nothing waited for him at the cabin except silence and his own breath, which came with more effort these days. The years had wrapped themselves around his back like a coiled rope, tight, heavy, always there. He spotted her just past the fence line, where the canyon shadows stretched long and thin. At first, she looked like a scarecrow someone had forgotten to drag back in. Her dress was torn, stiff with dust and blood, hair tangled across her face like dried weeds. She was tied to the post with wire, wrists raw and purple, and one of her boots was missing. Her head hung low. For a long second, Elias thought she was dead. He dismounted slow, boots crunching gravel, the mare snorting behind him. The woman stirred at the sound, weak and wary. She lifted her head with effort. Her eyes blue, fierce even through the pain, locked onto his like a warning. "Don't," she rasped. Elias paused, tipping his hat back. "Don't what?" "Don't untie me. They're watching." She tried to twist her head, motioning somewhere beyond the rise. "They want someone to stop." He glanced toward the ridge. Nothing but rock and dry mesquite. Still, he felt it. That tickle on the back of his neck, the one he'd learned never to ignore. "How long you been out here?" he asked. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Her mouth was cracked from thirst. Elias stepped forward, slow and deliberate, like approaching a spooked animal. She flinched when he reached for her wrists, but she didn't protest again. The wire bit deep, rusted and cruel. His hands weren't as steady as they used to be, but they were still good enough. He cut her loose with the knife from his boot and caught her before she fell. She didn't weigh much, just bones and desperation wrapped in calico. He carried her back to his mare, lifted her onto the saddle, and walked beside them the mile back to his place. She didn't speak. Her head rested against the mare's neck, and her eyes stayed open. The cabin was a squat thing nestled in a notch of dry rock, tucked where the wind didn't bite so hard. Elias had built it with his own hands near 20 years ago and hadn't changed a thing since. It was sparse but solid, like the man himself. Inside, he laid her on the cot and lit the lantern. He fetched water and offered it to her in a chipped tin cup. She drank with shaking hands, then set the cup down like it weighed 100 pounds. "You got a name?" he asked, setting to work boiling cloth and mixing salve. "Clara," she said, voice hoarse. "Clara Ridge." Elias didn't react, though the name meant something. It stirred in the dust of his memory, like a buried thing trying to breathe. "You from the Ridge ranch up near Snake Hollow?" She nodded. "What's left of it?" He didn't press. The salve stung when he applied it to her wrists, but she didn't flinch. "You do this often?" she asked after a long silence. "What's that?" "Rescue strangers. Play the fool." He glanced at her, and there was something like a smile in the corner of his mouth, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Don't get many visitors out this way. Figured I'd make an exception." She looked around the cabin then. Her gaze rested on the rifle hanging above the door, the way the tools on the wall were lined up neat. "You used to be a soldier?" "No," he said simply. "A lawman." He looked at her, but said nothing. She nodded to herself, as if that was answer enough. Night came fast in the desert, swallowing the horizon in deep blue. Elias fed the stove and sat near the door, eyes never leaving the window. Clara lay still on the cot, watching him the way one watches fire, half comforted, half afraid. "They'll come," she said softly. "I wasn't just bait. I was a message." Elias didn't ask what it said. "They burned the ranch," she continued. "My father, brothers. All of them. I ran. Thought I'd make it to town. Didn't get far." He didn't speak. The stove crackled. "I saw their faces," she whispered. "I remember every one. They know that. Gang." She nodded. "Blackridge Riders." That name he did recognize. The corners of his jaw tightened. Didn't know they were still around. They are. And they're meaner now. More organized. Someone new's laid in them. Elias stood, walked to the window, and peered out. The land was quiet, but too quiet. He couldn't shake the sense of being watched. "You gonna turn me out?" she asked. He turned back, his silhouette dark against the lamplight. "No," he said. "That wouldn't be neighborly. I ain't your neighbor." "You are now." Clara watched him for a moment, then nodded slowly. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself, as if only now realizing the cold. The fire burned low. Outside, the wind had picked up, stirring the branches. Somewhere in the canyon, a coyote howled. Elias sat back down, rifle across his lap. He didn't know yet how many were coming. Didn't know how long they'd wait before making their move. But he did know one thing. He wasn't going to run. Not again. Morning brought no peace. The sun crept over the horizon, stretching long golden fingers across the canyon floor, lighting the dry world in warm tones that fooled the eye. Everything looked calm. But Clara knew better. So did Elias. He stepped out onto the porch with a cup of coffee, steam rising into the brisk morning air. From there, he surveyed the land, nothing but scrub, dust, and stone. No riders in sight, but that didn't mean they weren't there. Inside, Clara sat at the small table, her hands wrapped around her own tin mug. She hadn't slept. Not really. Her eyes were red from tears she hadn't let fall, her back stiff from lying too long on an unfamiliar cot. Still, there was something stronger in her face now, something hardened overnight. "I should leave," she said, the moment he stepped back inside. "They want me. Not you." Elias poured another cup without answering. "I'm serious," she pressed. "You helped me. That was more than most would have done. I won't bring blood to your door." He took a slow sip. "It's already here." She stared at him, mouth opening to argue, but something about his voice, calm, final, made her stop. "I saw the smoke," Elias said after a beat, setting his cup down. "Night before last. Thought it was a lightning fire. Wasn't until I found you I figured it for a torch job." Clara looked down at her hands. They didn't leave anything. Not a single soul. Just tied me up and waited, like bait on a hook. Elias nodded. "Only fools and decent men stop for bait. They get fewer every year." There was a moment of silence between them, thick and unspoken. Clara broke it. "You've seen this before." Elias didn't answer. "You knew their name yesterday. Blackridge Riders. That gang's been haunting the territories for 15 years. Thought they were finished 5 ago, after a martial out of Cheyenne put a few in the dirt." He stepped to the window and pulled the curtain aside, just an inch. "But gangs are like brush fires. You don't stamp every ember. They come back stronger." Clara stood. "Then we go. Ride out now. I know a path north, through the ravine. They won't expect us to move so soon." "They're not expecting anything," Elias said. "They already know." She stared. "How?" "Because they've been watching since yesterday. You were right. This place is under the eye." He turned and pointed to the rise beyond the south ridge. "See that? Buzzards V been circling the same point since dawn. Means something dead up there, or waiting to be." She moved to the window and looked. A slow breath escaped her lips. "You gonna tell me who you are?" she asked. Elias considered. Then he crossed the room, opened the trunk beneath his bed, and lifted out a folded coat. Dust clouded into the air. Beneath the coat lay a worn leather gun belt and a badge tarnished, its star still catching light in the right angle. Clara stepped back, eyes widening. "Marshal." "Was," Elias said. "Before the badge meant nothing. Before men like the ones coming turned it into a target." "What happened?" "They killed my wife. Burned my boy's homestead. Called it justice. I called it something else. That was the last time I rode for the law." She stared at him like seeing him for the first time. "Then why help me?" "Because I didn't then. Not fast enough. Not loud enough. And I've been trying to live quiet ever since. But quiet don't hold off the past." He strapped the belt on. It looked almost natural there, like it had never left his hip. Clara reached for the rifle hanging on the wall. Then let's not wait. Elias nodded. They'll come slow at first. Testin'. Once they know I'm not alone, they'll circle. Won't the law help? He let out a dry chuckle. Nearest sheriff's 2 towns over. The riders own half the land between here and there. If anyone rides, it'll be for the wrong reason. They spent the rest of the morning preparing. Clara helped where she could, still favoring her left leg from the rope burns. Elias rigged traps, thin wire across the porch steps, trip lines on the path, a scatter of broken glass beneath the windows. He had only so many bullets, and he counted them like a banker weighs coin. By midday, the sun stood high and punishing. The wind had gone still. Even the cicadas held their breath. That's when they heard it, hoofbeats. Elias was the first to move, stepping out to the porch, rifle in hand. Clara followed, her own borrowed revolver heavy at her side. 4 riders emerged over the ridge, dirty, long-coated, their faces hidden beneath hats and bandanas. The lead man reined in his horse, just beyond the wire fence. His voice carried easily on the still air. You got something belongs to us, old man. Elias didn't answer. We ain't here to negotiate. She's ours. You give her up, we ride off. You don't, well, you'll see. Clara's fingers tightened around the revolver's grip. Elias took 1 step forward. What's your name? The man cocked his head. Don't matter. I think it does. A pause. Then, Jeb Callahan. Elias nodded. I knew your father. Jeb's expression darkened beneath his brim. That's so. Knew him back when he was a thief with charm instead of rage. I put a bullet in his leg when he robbed a stage in Dakota. You've got a scowl, but none of his brains. That did it. Jeb's horse reared as he yanked the reins. You just signed your death slip, old man. Elias didn't flinch. I signed it a long time ago. The riders turned and disappeared back over the ridge. Elias lowered his rifle. They'll come at night. Clara stared out at the empty horizon. Then we'd best be ready, she said. Twilight dropped like a curtain over the canyon, thick with silence and dust. Shadows stretched across the land, melting into one another until the whole desert seemed to hold its breath. Inside the cabin, the air was close, heavy with anticipation and wood smoke. Elias checked the window for the 5th time. No movement, no glint of rifle barrels in the rocks. But that meant nothing. Men like the Blackridge riders didn't waste ammunition. They came in slow, deliberate, with teeth. Clara paced behind him. She hadn't said a word in nearly 20 minutes, just kept checking the revolver he'd given her, opening and closing the chamber like it might hold more answers than bullets. They'll wait till it's good and dark, Elias murmured. I know, she replied. That's what we do. He looked at her then, really looked. Dirt still clung to her skin, and the bruise on her cheek had bloomed darker overnight. But there was no panic in her anymore. No helplessness. Just resolve, sharp and bitter like a winter wind. You ever shot a man before? He asked. No, she said. But I've watched them kill everyone I love. Can't be much harder than that. He gave a slight nod, then moved to the stove and killed the fire. The room dimmed, shadows crawling into the corners. Only a single lantern remained lit, its wick turned low. Darkness had a way of revealing who you really were. Outside, a coyote yelped. Then silence again. Then the low, unmistakable creak of saddle leather. Elias moved to the front window. Here they come. Clara joined him, squinting into the gloom. Faint movement along the ridge line. Dismounted men creeping low through the brush, rifles in hand. A glint of steel. A whisper of breath, carried by the wind. He reached for his rifle and chambered around. Stay low. Aim for center mass. Don't waste your shots. She crouched behind the overturned table, revolver resting on the wood. Her hands no longer trembled. The first shot came like lightning, sharp, sudden, splitting the quiet with a crack that echoed through the canyon. A window shattered behind them. Wood splinters exploded across the room. Elias didn't flinch. He fired back, a single, measured shot. Somewhere in the dark, a man screamed. They'll flank next, he said. Push us into the open. Clara moved to the back door, eyes wide and alert. I'll cover the rear. He gave her a look, proud and grim. Good. The next volley came faster, scattered shots from different angles. Bullets chewed into the walls, sent dust and glass raining down. One struck the lantern. Flame flared and died, leaving the room lit only by moonlight filtering through the smoke. A shadow darted across the porch. Elias pivoted, fired. A thud. Then silence. "Count 'em," he whispered. "3 on the left, 2 in back, maybe 1 near the barn." Clara replied. "Could be more." Elias nodded. "They're testing us. Still holding numbers in reserve." More shouts echoed from the dark. Taunts, curses, threats. Then a torch arced high into the air and crashed against the barn's roof. Flames leapt skyward, orange and furious. Clara turned toward it instinctively. "The horses." "Gone," Elias said. "Let them go this morning. Didn't want 'em trapped." She blinked, surprised, then returned her eyes to the night. "Smart." He smiled faintly. "Sometimes I remember how to be." The fire lit the field now, casting wild, dancing light across the front yard. And in that light, the riders came. 6 charging low and hard. Screams and hoofbeats merged into a wave of chaos. Elias fired first. Clara followed. 2 went down before they hit the porch. Another tripped a wire and vanished into a pit with a sickening crack. Still, one made it to the door, only to catch the butt of Elias's rifle full in the jaw. Blood sprayed the floor. Elias didn't wait for him to fall. He turned and fired again through the shattered window. A man howled and dropped. Clara crouched, breathing hard, smoke stinging her eyes. Her hands were covered in dust and blood, but she didn't feel either. She just kept shooting. Then suddenly it was quiet. The riders were gone, retreating. Elias stepped outside slowly, rifle ready. The night pulsed around him. The barn was a skeletal blaze behind the cabin, sending smoke spiraling into the stars. Clara followed him out, watching the shadows move beyond the fence line. "They're regrouping," she said. "They'll come again." "Yes," Elias said, "but next time they won't underestimate us." She turned to him. "You move like someone half your age." He smiled, tired and hollow. "Pain don't slow me. Regret, that's heavier." A gust of wind carried ash through the air. The land glowed red and black. "Think they'll try to burn us out?" Clara asked. "They might," Elias said. "Or they'll wait for dawn. Hope we're too worn to fight." "Are we?" He looked at her, at the blood on her hands, the dirt in her hair, the firelight in her eyes. "We're not done yet." Behind them, the barn collapsed in a roar of sparks, but the cabin still stood, scorched but intact. A single line drawn in the dust, daring the night to cross it, and the night wasn't done crossing. The hours between midnight and dawn belonged to ghosts, the kind that whispered through the walls and breathed down your spine. In the dim hush of the cabin, with gunpowder thick in the air and ash still falling like snow from the burning barn, Elias Boone remembered every face he'd failed to save. He sat in the corner, rifle across his knees, watching the door as if it might blink. Outside, the desert had gone still again, as if the siege were just a bad dream waiting to resume. Clara sat opposite him, legs tucked beneath her like a schoolgirl, revolver in hand. She didn't speak much. Her eyes stayed sharp, watching the same door. They'd spoken enough already. Words wouldn't stop what was coming. "You ever been shot at before?" Elias asked, voice soft in the dark. "No," Clara replied. "You held up like you had." "I had no choice. That's usually when it counts." She studied him through the flickering lamplight. "Why'd you quit being a marshal?" He didn't look at her. "Because Justice died the day the law got sold." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "There's a town near Fort Willoughby. Nice place, before the mine dispute. Big family owned the silver claim. When squatters tried to settle near it, they sent hired guns to make the message clear. I rode in when the smoke was still rising. Found bodies stacked in the churchyard. Women, kids. No jury ever saw it. No badge did a thing." Clara swallowed. "What did you do?" "I stopped wearing the badge and started sleeping less. That's about all." He stood and moved to the window, peering out over the scorched yard. "I've killed men, Clara. Not always in uniform. Some needed it. Others I'll never be sure about. She rose, stepped beside him. "You're sure about tonight?" He gave a slow nod. "Yeah, tonight's different." A faint rustling drifted in from the darkness, too soft for the wind. Clara tensed. Elias held up a hand. He moved to the door and opened it just enough to slip outside, disappearing into the shadows without sound. The yard glowed faintly from the dying embers of the barn. Ash crunched beneath his boots. He crouched near the porch and listened. There, by the fence, a shape, slumped and still. He moved like smoke, silent and low. When he reached the body, he saw it was one of the riders from earlier. Young, maybe 18, barely old enough to shave. Still breathing, but shallow. The boy's chest was soaked in blood, eyes unfocused as Elias leaned down. "Why were you here?" Elias asked. The boy tried to speak, but only managed to gurgle. Elias tilted his head, waiting. "Not for the girl," the boy whispered. Elias frowned. "What?" They want you." The boy went still. Elias stared, cold creeping up his spine. He turned, scanning the horizon. It all fell into place. Clara met him at the door when he returned. "Well, they weren't after you," he said. Her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" He set the rifle down and took off his coat, revealing the badge tucked beneath his shirt, still dull with age. "They came for me. You were the bait." Clara looked stunned. "But how would they know?" "Because someone's stirring up the past," Elias said. "Someone who remembers what I used to be." He crossed the room to the trunk, rifling through it until he pulled out a stack of papers, old warrants, case notes, wanted posters faded to yellow. He found the name after a moment. Harlan Vex. Clara narrowed her eyes. "That name sounds made up." "Probably is," Elias said. "But he was smart. Ran the Blackridge Riders before anyone knew who they were. We never caught him, never saw his face. Always sent boys to do his bidding. Robberies, murders, town burnings. Until one day it all stopped." "Why?" "Because I shot his brother in Dodge. Didn't know who he was. Just another bandit pulling a gun during a standoff." Clara sat slowly. "So all of this is revenge?" Elias nodded. "It's not just about justice. It's about memory. He wants me to die slow. Watching." She stared at him, breathing hard. "Then we're not just outnumbered. We're hunted." "Yes." Silence thickened between them. The wind picked up outside, carrying a sharp, bitter edge. Finally, Clara spoke. "Then we hunt him first." Elias turned. "That's not your fight." She stepped closer, fierce and sure. "It is now. You saved my life. My family's gone, but I'm not. And if the man who took everything from me is the same one who wants your blood, then we end him. Together." Elias searched her eyes, saw something there that reminded him of long-lost comrades. The kind who didn't run when the odds turned. The kind who stayed. "All right," he said. "At first light." They both looked out the window, past the ruined barn, toward the hills where shadows gathered. Somewhere out there, Harlan Vex was waiting. The siege had begun with fire and bullets, but it would end with something older. Justice. Or vengeance. Or maybe something worse. Dawn broke with a red horizon, like the sky itself had been slashed open and left to bleed. The desert shimmered beneath it, still and waiting, the ash from the barn carried off by the restless wind. Elias Boone stood just beyond the porch, adjusting the strap of his rifle, his silhouette etched against the pale fire of morning. Clara was beside him, the revolver steady in her grip, eyes clear despite the sleepless night. They said the man called Vex never came himself, always sent others to kill, to burn, to carry his name like a plague. But now he had, and that meant one thing. He was sure this was the end. "Horsemen," Clara whispered. Elias didn't move. "How many?" "Too many." Dust rolled behind the rising line of riders, 10 or 12 maybe, all armed, all dressed in death. And in their center, riding a tall black stallion like a general of hell itself, was Harlan Vex. No bandana, no disguise, just a man with cold, dead eyes and a scar that ran like a crack through stone from brow to cheek. Elias stepped forward. "You come a long way," he called, voice calm. Vex reined in his horse. Long enough. Clara squinted against the light. That's him. Yeah, Elias said. That's the ghost. Vex smiled. Been waiting a long time for this, Boone. I figured. You took blood from me. My brother. My name. And how many did you take? Elias asked. How many graves did your boots walk over? Vex tilted his head. Too many to count. Then let's add one more. The silence cracked. A single shot rang out. Elias fired first. The rider to Vex's left dropped from his saddle before his horse even reacted. Chaos followed. Bullets screamed. Dirt kicked skyward. Clara ducked and rolled behind a wagon axle, firing in short, controlled bursts. Elias moved like a man half his age. Every shot deliberate, every step earned. The riders came hard and fast, but the land was no friend to them. Elias had dug traps beneath the sand, shallow pits, broken glass, tripwires that yanked men from saddles. One rider's horse went down screaming, rolling its rider beneath its weight. Another caught a bullet from Clara between the eyes before his rifle ever found its mark. Elias climbed to the cabin roof, scanning for Vex through the rising dust. But Vex was gone, off his horse, somewhere in the confusion. Clara shouted from below. Flank. Left side. He pivoted. Two riders broke through the perimeter, one aiming for Clara. Elias dropped one with a shot through the chest. The second reached Clara before Elias could fire again. They struggled. Clara's revolver knocked from her grip. She didn't scream, just reached for the knife in her boot and drove it into the rider's ribs, twice, before shoving him off. Elias leapt from the roof, rolled, came up firing, and then silence. The last rider fled, disappearing into the desert like smoke. Only the dead remained, strewn across the yard. Except for one. Vex stepped from behind the cabin, revolver leveled. No more tricks, Boone. Elias turned slowly. Vex's voice was low. All these years. Thought I'd feel more when I saw you again. But I don't. Just emptiness. You always were hollow, Elias said. Vex smiled faintly. You think you're justice. You're just another killer with a better story. Clara stepped out from behind the cabin, revolver in hand. You talk too much. Vex spun to fire, but Elias was already moving. His shot struck true, and Vex staggered, clutching his side. Still, he turned his gun on Clara, raising it with shaking fingers. She fired once, and Harlan Vex fell. The dust settled, the wind died, and for the first time in 2 days, no sound followed but the rustle of the mesquite and the groan of a dying fire. Clara exhaled, lowering her gun. It's done. Elias stared down at Vex's body. No, it's just finally caught up. They buried the dead before noon. No words, just earth and stone. The canyon held its breath, then exhaled. Later, Elias sat on the porch, the sun climbing high. Clara brought him a tin cup of water and sat beside him. Her hands were raw. Her eyes no longer looked like they belonged to a girl. You still a lawman? She asked quietly. He sipped, then shook his head. Not anymore. But you still wear the badge. I wear the memory. She nodded slowly. What happens now? You ride north, he said. There's a town called Dry Hollow. Marshal there's decent. You tell him what happened. He'll vouch for you. Maybe find you work. And you? Elias looked out at the canyon. I stay. She tilted her head. Why? He smiled faintly. Because legends don't ride off. They stay where the story ends. Clara didn't argue. Just sat beside him until the sun started to fall again. When she left that evening, she took the younger mare Elias had hidden in the smokehouse. She looked back once, saw him still on the porch, watching the horizon like he was waiting for the world to remember him. They say a cabin still stands in the canyon where fire once lit the sky. Some say the man who guards it never aged another day. Others say he walks the desert still, a ghost with a rifle and a badge that never rusts. But all agree on this. Justice came late to the frontier. But when it came with fire.